Okay, so model creation. This is our first step in trying to make a game. For me, this is my first step. I like to make the model first, so as I develop my coding and everything else, I've got a main character to build the game around. So this is my first step. Doesn't have to be your first step, but this is what we're talking about right now. The very first step in model creation for the workflow that I've developed is concepting a high poly model. So what your high poly model is a model that has all the details in it with unlimited amount of vertices. You're not really worried at this point about game performance or engine performance. You just want to get what the model looks like in its entirety. So I create a high poly model version of my character, and then I go into the steps to make a low poly model version of that character. And the way you do that is through a technique called retopology. Retopology is basically sticking little points onto your model, vertices onto your model all over the place, creating new edge flow is what they call it, clean polygons all the way across, so that it can be read by the computer easier, so that it can be ran by the game engine without as much draw on memory, GPU draw, CPU draw, and it's going to deform better underneath the animation with the rig. So once you retopo it, you're then going to go ahead and create some UVs for that model. So you've got your high poly model and your low poly model. Then you'll create UVs, and what UVs are is you want to think of chocolate bunnies for this. If you've never heard of what a UV is, think about a skin that goes around your model like this chocolate bunny. You can see that this chocolate bunny has, its little eyes and its bow and bell and all that good stuff, and it all looks like it's in the right place. But this tinfoil obviously is not normally in this shape. You could unfold it and make it completely flat. And when you unfold that model and make it completely flat, you're gonna have a super weird looking chocolate bunny. So here's my unwrapped UV chocolate bunny. You can see that now, like that is one chubby bunny. It's distorted, it's warped, it's laid out flat, but that's not the bunny we saw in the original picture. So that's what we're doing with our model. We are basically skinning, we're taking the tinfoil off of our model, and we are laying it flat so that we can then paint on it and create textures with it. So after you finish creating your UVs for your model, you're going to bake your model. What you're doing is you're taking all the information from the high poly model, all that lighting information, the way light's supposed to interact with it, where the curvature is in the model, the ambient occlusion, so where's naturally going to be a more shadowy section of the model, like inside the eyes or under the armpits, between the legs, between the fingers, things like that. And you're going to take all the information from the high poly model, and you're going to place it on top of those UV materials that you made earlier. And all that is done behind the scenes. It comes down to really a couple of buttons that you're going to press. And it's then your low poly model is going to look like a high poly model. But from the side, you can still tell that there's faceting. You can still see, when you look up close, oh yeah, that's still my low poly model, but zoomed out, it looks perfectly smooth and high definition. And it's a really great way to get that stellar looking high poly model on a low poly base mesh. So after you finish baking it, you can go ahead at this point and you can texture it and paint it. And then once it's textured and painted, for my workflow, it's good to be set up for the rig. You don't have to do everything exactly in these orders. Like, you don't have to create textures or bake your model before you send your low poly model off to start getting rigged. You might want to start rigging your low poly model first before you do anything else to see if your edge flow is going to deform right with everything. And then once you get your edge flow right with the deformations and that whole retopo section is 100% finalized, then create UV materials, then bake your model. So it really depends on how you want to do this, how in depth you want to get with breaking it up. But in the next video, I'm going to show you a couple of resources that you can find and you can use online to start teaching yourself these different steps. All right, guys, I'll see you then.